On the stormy night, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Every gust seemed to carry a hidden threat. Raindrops pelted the windows as if trying to break them, and lightning illuminated the house with spectral flashes. My younger brother Tim and I were the only ones at home. Our parents had already left for a week-long trip, leaving us alone. Tim, only 8 years old, depended on me, and although I tried to stay calm for him, I was actually terrified. As the night progressed and the storm intensified, the roar of the wind shook the windows and made the walls creak. Tim and I tried to distract ourselves by watching a movie, but the constant noise made it hard to concentrate. Something in the atmosphere felt different. It was as if a strange premonition was lurking in every corner of the house. The storm was so violent that the lightning intermittently lit up the room, casting long and terrifying shadows on the walls. It was almost midnight when Tim fell asleep on the couch, curled up beside me. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried to ignore that feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. Between the lightning flashes, I could make out the figure of a tall man standing outside in front of the window. My pulse stopped and I had to hold my breath, praying it was just a shadow or an illusion created by the storm. But it wasn't an illusion. The figure remained there, firm, motionless, his dark silhouette standing out against the overcast sky. He was as real as the storm itself. He seemed to be watching me, his eyes fixed on me, though his face remained in shadows. I felt a chill run through my body, a mix of panic and pure terror. I wanted to wake Tim, but fear had me paralyzed. The figure, with slow and deliberate movements, took a step closer to the window, and it was then that another lightning bolt illuminated his face for a moment. Pale and with a twisted expression, his crooked and perverse smile seemed to mock my fear. Suddenly, the figure raised a hand and gently tapped the glass. The sound was dry, hollow, like a funeral call. The force of the tap shook the entire room and filled me with dread. The tapping repeated, but this time with more force. Then, with a sudden movement, the man tried to open the window. I screamed in pure terror, jumping to my feet as my mind tried to find a way to escape. The window began to give way, opening slowly, and before I could do anything, the figure started to enter the house. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The man, or whatever that figure was tall, much taller than I had initially imagined. As he entered the room, a thick darkness seemed to envelop him, hiding part of his face, but the nauseating smell he emanated was unmistakable. A sweet and putrid mix that made me gag. Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. I got no response. The intruder only took another step forward, his cold, lifeless eyes staring into mine as if piercing my soul. I felt a desperate urge to scream and run, but terror paralyzed me. I was trapped in a kind of macabre trance, unable to move. The figure took another step, and as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. I blinked, stunned, trying to comprehend if what I had seen was real. For a few seconds, the room remained silent, only broken by the roar of the storm raging outside. But upon seeing the window ajar, I knew it hadn't been a hallucination. The figure had been here mere inches from me. I breathed heavily, feeling my legs give way. I knew I had to get Tim out of the house, and quickly. With trembling hands, I scooped him up and, without looking back, ran to the door. The rain was pouring in torrents, and the wind nearly swept me away, but I kept running until we were far enough from the house. Throughout the night, the storm's roar continued to rage, mimicking the intensity of my fear. In the darkness, I knew the figure was still out there, watching, waiting for his next move. And although the first light of dawn finally dispelled the shadows and calmed my breathing, I realized I would never forget that night, and the visit from the tall man who peered through my window. My life took a direction I never imagined a few years ago. It all started when, after a heated argument with my parents, I decided to move alone into our large house to prove to them, and to myself, that I could handle life without help. The house, old and enormous, had a beauty that had always captivated me, despite its dark hallways, cold drafts, and the incessant creaking of the wooden floors. It didn't matter that the atmosphere was somewhat gloomy. To me, that house was a refuge, a place where I could escape the difficulties and dramas of the outside world. At first, living alone in such a large and empty house was quite a challenge. Every time absolute silence enveloped me, a mix of fear and uncertainty took hold, as if at any moment something could break the tranquility of that space. However, I mustered up courage and kept telling myself that solitude was something I could endure, that my independence was worth demonstrating, even if the house didn't always welcome me. Then came that dark and cold night. I was in bed reading a book to try to ward off the feeling of emptiness when a strange noise from the basement made me look up. At first, I thought it might be a small animal or the house's own noises settling down. After all, the place was old and the furniture and walls seemed to have a life of their own when everything was silent. However, as the minutes passed, the noise intensified. It wasn't a simple creak. It sounded something deeper, something resonating as if someone or something was moving beneath my feet. A chill began to run down my spine. After taking a deep breath, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a lamp that was next to the bed and went down the wooden stairs, each step echoing like a ghostly echo that increased the tension in my chest. The gloom in the basement was thick, almost tangible, like a fog that covered everything I could see. Every corner seemed to hide secrets and mysteries I was unaware of. My heart pounded as I illuminated with the flashlight the dust-filled corners and the shelves covered in cobwebs, but everything seemed calm. Just as I was about to return to my room, I heard a soft groan coming from behind a pile of old boxes. My breath stopped. My hand trembled as I tried to hold the flashlight steady. I felt that every second of that experience was plunging me deeper into a kind of gloomy and eerie nightmare. I took another slow breath and approached, trying not to make any noise. When I reached the corner, I could see him. There, hunched over, was a man. His eyes were wide open, reflecting the same fear I felt when seeing him. I stopped, motionless, with a mix of terror and surprise that prevented me from even breathing normally. Who was he? How had he managed to enter my house without me noticing? And why was he hiding in the basement in that dark and secluded corner? Before I could process the horror of the situation, the man spoke. His voice trembled, as if he was trapped between desperation and terror. He told me he had been living on the streets for months and that night, the cold had been unbearable. Seeking refuge, he had entered my house with the sole intention of spending a warm night. He begged me not to call the police. He promised that if I let him go, he would leave forever and never return. I felt trapped between fear and compassion. On one hand, logic told me I should call the police. After all, he was an intruder, someone who had invaded my space without permission. But at the same time, something inside me prevented me from turning my back on him. I felt a strange empathy for his situation, an understanding of his vulnerability on that cold and dark night. Finally, I let empathy overcome fear. I helped him leave the house, watching him disappear into the night. I promised to keep his secret, although something inside me knew I wouldn't be able to forget what had happened. As the days passed, that unease took root in my mind. Every noise in the house made me jump, and every shadow reminded me of his fear-filled eyes. Then one night, while trying to fall asleep, I heard noises in the basement again. This time, the sound was clearer, closer, as if someone was prowling just meters away from me. I mustered up courage once more and took the flashlight. With each step I took, the fear grew more intense, almost palpable. I went down the stairs, and when I reached the bottom, I saw him again. The man was standing in the center of the room with a look of madness in his eyes. Before I could react, he moved toward me with his hands outstretched, as if he wanted to grab me. My scream echoed in the darkness as I fell backward, trying to find something to defend myself with. It was then that my eyes landed on a baseball bat resting against the wall. I grabbed it and turned around, feeling a surge of adrenaline. But in that instant, he was no longer there. He disappeared, as if he had never been there. I stayed silent, trembling. I knew fear was taking control of my life, but I didn't know how to handle it. Something inside me told me that if I called the police and told them what happened, they wouldn't believe me. It was hard to explain, even to myself. Weeks passed, and although I tried to live a normal life, the fear never disappeared. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every whisper of the wind made me remember his fear-filled eyes. One day, while cleaning the basement, I found something that chilled me to the bone. An improvised bed behind a pile of boxes. There were used food bags and dirty clothes. Someone had been living there near me in silence, hidden in the gloom. Nausea overwhelmed me as I realized the situation. I gathered my courage and called the police. I told them everything, from the man in the basement to the noises at night. The officers searched the entire house but found no trace of him. However, a neighbor mentioned seeing a strange-looking man prowling around the area. When the police confronted him, he confessed to having lived in my basement for several weeks. He said he wasn't trying to harm me. He was just seeking shelter and some food. Still, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. I felt a wave of relief when they handcuffed him and took him away. My life was returning to normal, but the trauma and fear he left in me would linger for a long time. My name is Alex. I'm 22 years old and live alone in a small, cozy house on the outskirts of the city. I love the tranquility of the place. The whisper of the leaves and the occasional song of the birds provide me with a peace that isn't found in the city. Solitude and isolation are things I've always enjoyed, but tonight, solitude feels different. It's a dark night, without moonlight, and the gloom is so deep it seems to devour everything around. I sit in my living room with the lights low, letting only the faint lamp beside me illuminate the place. The constant ticking of the clock fills the silence, and I try to ignore the slight tingle of discomfort that has accompanied me all night. My plan for tonight was simple. Me, a few movies, and a quiet night at home. However, the stillness makes me nervous, and every creak of the house makes me jump and look back, hoping to find something or someone hidden in the shadows. I try to convince myself I'm overreacting, that it's just my imagination, but then I hear it. A soft sound, barely perceptible, like a scraping that seems to come from somewhere inside the house. My heart races, and I stay completely still, listening intently, trying to catch every detail. The noise disappears as quickly as it arrived, leaving me uncertain whether it was real or if I simply imagined it. I take a deep breath, trying to calm myself and focus on the television. But the thought of that scrape keeps lingering in my mind, like a persistent echo. I try to rationalize it by telling myself maybe it's just a mouse. But deep down I know it's not. There's something in the air tonight, something that doesn't feel right. I reach for the remote, but notice that I'm trembling. I consider turning off the TV and going to bed. However, before I can make the decision, the noise returns. This time, the sound is louder and more constant. It seems to come from upstairs, from the direction of my bedroom. A chill runs down my spine. My skin goosebumps and panic begins to take hold of me. What or who could be up there? Although I want to convince myself it's just my mind playing tricks on me, fear firmly settles inside me. With every fiber of courage I can muster, I get up and begin to climb the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the silence of the house as if the very floor were conspiring to heighten my fear. As I approach my bedroom, the scraping becomes more intense, a kind of eerie melody invading my ears. When I finally reach the top of the stairs, I stop, holding my breath as I listen closely. The sound seems to come directly from behind my closed door. With my heart pounding in my chest like a drum, I bring my trembling hand to the doorknob. I take a breath, muster up courage, and turn the knob. The room is engulfed in shadows, illuminated only by a faint ray of light seeping through the window, casting distorted shapes on the walls. For a moment, I think it was all my imagination. As I enter the room, I convince myself I was just anxious and that fear had played a trick on me. But when I shine the light on the wall, I see a long scratch mark running its entire length. It's a jagged and deep line, as if something or someone had dragged their nails forcefully, leaving a scar on the plaster. My breathing quickens as a chill runs through my entire body. Someone was in my room, hidden in the shadows, waiting. The idea of staying in the house even one more second becomes unbearable. I want to run, but fear keeps me motionless. Suddenly, a low and chilling sound echoes in the room, a hollow and malevolent laugh that seems to emanate from the very shadows. I freeze, my heart beating so fast I feel it's going to explode. The laughter grows, resonating in every corner, filling the room with an evil presence. Then, from the gloom, a figure begins to materialize. Its body is distorted, twisted in a way that defies all logic, and its eyes burn like embers in the darkness. Its mouth opens into a macabre smile full of sharp teeth. I feel terror paralyze me. Just as the figure lunges at me with its outstretched claws, I scream, and the sound of my own panic mixes with the echo of the void. Darkness closes in around me, and everything goes silent. When I wake up, the sunlight is just beginning to filter through the blinds. My first thought is that it was all just a horrible nightmare, but upon seeing the scratch mark on the wall, I realize it was real, a tangible warning of the horrors lurking in the darkness. I leave the house, promising myself never to return. But even in the daylight, I feel that something or someone is still watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to attack again the next night.